We look at the current contracts on the LA Kings roster and give them a thumbs up or a thumbs down on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love for you to leave us a positive comment on Apple Podcasts if you're a fan of the show. And we're on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network. Also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 17 years, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. We're going to look at the current contracts of the players that we believe will make up the Kings' opening night roster and players that are also some important possible call-ups. We're going to give a few details, and then I'll give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down. I probably could have given them a letter grade, but I thought let's just make this as cut and dry as possible. I will say this. There are some of these contracts where I'm probably neutral on. I don't think they're great. I don't think they're terrible. They're okay, but I don't like ties. I want a definitive answer. One of the things I hated when I first became a hockey fan was that there were ties in the NHL. Thank God they got rid of those, because I just hated investing my time and sometimes my money in something, and then I didn't have a feeling at the end of it where I could be happy or I could be mad. I was just like, oh, okay, we tied. Now, I'm not saying I think the shootout's necessarily the greatest thing in the world, but it's better than a tie, at least for me. So with that in mind, all these contracts are going to get a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So we'll start with the player that we cannot include, and at the moment anyway, and that would be restricted free agent defenseman Jordan Spence. Obviously, he's unsigned, so we can't give his contract a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And then, of course, we did a whole show on Monday on forward Arthur Kaliyev. He's a wild card at this point. Not sure exactly how that's going to go. So obviously he will not be mentioned, but it's possible he could be on the Kings opening night lineup. We'll just have to wait and see. We're going to start with the forward group, and we're going to begin with kind of the obvious and the cheapest deals. There are 5 players that will likely be a part of the Kings opening night roster or expected to have a shot at it that are getting paid less than $1 million, and 3 of them are making the absolute league minimum. Akil Thomas is going into year 1 of a 2-year contract that pays him the league minimum, $775,000. Alex Turcotte is going into year 1 of a 3-year contract that pays him the league minimum, $775,000. And Samuel Fagemo is going into year 1 of a 1-year deal, also for the league minimum, $775,000. All 3 are expected to be given at least a shot at being a full-time NHL player this season, especially Thomas and Turcotte. Now, it would be pretty hard to underperform the league minimum. However, if they do, then we would see these players get sent down to the AHL. We all know that Fagemo is no longer waiver exempt because he was claimed off waivers by the Nashville Predators last season and then was reclaimed by the Kings later when the Predators put him on waivers. I'm pretty sure Akil Thomas and Alex Turcotte are also no longer waiver exempt. So if they do, in fact, get sent down to the AHL, they would be exposed for other teams to claim them. Now, again, I think Thomas and Turcotte are going to get every opportunity to succeed. We'll see about Fagemo. It's a possibility, but there's no reason to give these contracts a thumbs down, so they all get a thumbs up. Alex Laferriere is going into the final year of a 3-year entry-level deal that pays him $875,000 per season. He was probably the biggest surprise for the Kings last season, played all but one of their 82 games, put up a respectable 12 goals and 23 points. Very curious to see if he gets a chance to play on the wing on the top line with Quentin Byfield, presumably going to center. If he does, pretty good shot that those numbers will go up and he'll make his contract look even better. Alex Laferriere gets a thumbs up. And Trevor Lewis is going into year 1 of a 1-year contract that pays him $800,000. He played all 82 games last season for the Kings. Reliable old veteran, now 37 years old. He is the oldest player on the LA Kings roster. Now, if the young guys work out, I expect that Lewis would be a depth player. He would only play in case somebody got hurt or if somebody needed a rest or some time off, which you wouldn't think there would need much of that because these guys are young and hungry and ready to go. Now, if you think that Trevor Lewis needs to hang up the skates, that his time has passed, I could see giving this contract a thumbs down. But again, I'm okay with it. He's not making anything, just a bit above the league minimum. He's there for depth, I think. So right now, I'm going to give the contract to Trevor Lewis a thumbs up. All right, let's get into some of the more prominent contracts. We'll start with Anze Kopitar. He will be playing year one of a 2-year contract that'll pay him $7 million per season. It could be the final 2 years of the 36-year-old's NHL career. He is coming off a contract that was paying him $10 million per season, which at this point of his career, you could argue that was an overpayment. But I think $7 million per season is about right for a player of his stature. Now, some might legitimately wonder if Kopitar is still a number one NHL center. And while if you were playing on perhaps a cup contending team, he'd probably be a number 2 center. But there's no question he is the number 1 center on this Kings roster. It's not time for Quentin Byfield yet, and Philip Deneau certainly is a number 1 center. Now, there's no evidence at this point that the Kings captain is going to fall off a cliff in his production and Father Time is going to suddenly strike. It could happen, but I'm pretty confident it's not going to. Now, Kopitar is still very consistent and reliable. He's only missed 2 games over the last 3 seasons, and he's put up 70 or more points in each of the last 2 years. If you look at all the number 1 centers of the 16 teams that made the playoff last season, only one of them makes less than the $7 million that Anze Kopitar is going to make. That would be Nashville's Ryan O'Reilly. Of the other 15 top-line centers in the playoffs last season, 10 of them had 80 or fewer points. So Kopitar's 70 points are not that far off from what a lot of the top-line centers around the league are making. And keep in mind, Anze Kopitar is the oldest top-line center in the NHL. Kopitar is still holding his own. He is still an excellent two-way center, and he finished 5th in the Selke Trophy voting last year for the top defensive forward in the NHL. Even at his advanced age, $7 million for Anze Kopitar, I think it's a good deal. I will give it a thumbs up. Adrian Kempe is going into year 3 of a 4-year contract that pays him $5.5 million per season. Kempe led the Kings in scoring with 75 points. Again, looking at the 16 teams that made the playoffs last season, there was only one team whose leading point producer made less money than Adrian Kempe. That was Washington's Dylan Strome. He led the Capitals with 67 points. He gets paid $5 million per season. Of the 16 playoff teams, the average salary of their leading scorer is $9.8 million per season. Kempe is making almost half that. He'll be in line for a significant raise in a couple of seasons, but for now, easily a thumbs up for the contract of Adrian Kempe. Trevor Moore is going into year 2 of a 5-year contract that pays him $4.2 million per season. Moore led the Kings with 31 goals. Only one other player whose teams made the playoffs last year makes less money than Trevor Moore, who led their team in goal scoring, and that was young Dallas star standout Wyatt Johnston. Now, he's still on his rookie contract. He's making $894,000. Now, he's going to get a huge raise coming up very soon as he's going into the final year of his entry-level deal. The average annual value of a leading goal scorer from the 15 other teams that made the playoffs last year is $8.37 million. Moore is making half that. Now, he'll still need to stay around the 30-goal plateau for him to be in this list, but this deal is definitely a bargain for the LA Kings. If he can keep that production up, this gets a big thumbs up. Kevin Fiala is going to enter year 3 of a 7-year contract that pays him $7.88 million per season. He was second on the team in points with 73, second on the team in goals with 29. He was tied for 75th in the NHL as far as average annual value per season, putting him amongst players like Alex DeBrincat, Jesper Bratt, Nick Suzuki. When he was signed to that deal, it might have seemed like a bit on the high end, but in the end, I think the deal will be more than fair, especially towards the back end of the deal. He's a guy who is in contention every year as your leading point producer and your leading goal scorer. I'm giving the contract to Kevin Fiala a thumbs up. Quentin Byfield's going into year one of a 5-year contract that pays him $6.25 million per season. We talked a lot about this contract. It is a significant raise, and it's a fairly big investment in a player that the Kings are banking on is only going to get better as time goes on and should be a huge piece of the Kings' future. This is a great deal for the Kings and for Q. It gets a thumbs up. Philip Deneau's going into year 4 of a 6-year contract that pays him $5.5 million per season, the same as Adrian Kempe. And while Deneau is not as productive as Kempe, he is still a solid two-way center. Now, if Quentin Byfield takes over that second-line center position, Deneau will be a great third-line center. He might be a bit overpaid if he's a third-line center, but not much. I'm going to give his contract a thumbs up as well. Warren Foegele going into year 1 of a 3-year contract. It pays him $3.5 million per season, coming off a career year in goals with 20. He's more of a third-line player, could be on the Kings' second line, depending on what happens with Arthur Kaliev or Samuel Fagemo. A deal, $3 million range for a third-line winger who scores about 20 goals. It's about right. I'm going to give the contract to Warren Foegele a thumbs up. And finally, Tanner Jeannot is going into the final year of a 2-year contract that pays him $2.67 million per season. I believe he's the only player that is expected to be in the opening night roster for the Kings that was not signed by Rob Blake. He was signed by the general manager in Tampa Bay, Julien Brisebois, and then traded, of course, to the LA Kings. 2.67 per season is a little high for a fourth-line winger. Bit on the high side, but it's not outrageous. If he can bring that grit and toughness the Kings are looking for, I think it's a decent investment. And it's only for 1 year. If not, then they're obviously out of the Tanner Jeannot business after this season. So I'm going to give it a thumbs up as well. So I don't have any issue with any of the current contracts for the LA Kings forward group. Will that be the case for the defense? No, it will not. That's next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Drive passion and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You will always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, we continue our look at the current contracts for the LA Kings roster, and we shift our attention to the team's defense. Again, we cannot include Jordan Spence because right now he is unsigned. Brandt Clarke, though, is expected to be a full-time NHL player this coming season. He's going to be going into year 2 of a 3-year entry-level contract worth $863,334 with some performance bonuses built in as well. Hopefully, Clarke can have 2 great seasons and be in line for a significant raise 2 years from now. But for now, no reason not to give this contract a thumbs up. Andreas Englund is most likely the Kings' 7th defenseman. He's entering year 2 of a 2-year deal, making $1 million per season. That's what you want to pay a third pairing defenseman. Keep that in mind when we talk about another player who fits that description. Drew Doughty is entering year 6 of an 8-year contract that pays him $11 million per season. He's tied with Rasmus Dahlin of Buffalo for the second highest average annual value for any defenseman in the NHL, and he is tied for 9th of any player in the NHL as far as how much money he makes per season. Now, I love Drew, and he still does a lot for the Kings, but he is not deserving of being the 9th highest paid player per season in the NHL. He probably, if you're going to pay $11 million for a defenseman, that guy should be in the discussion for a Norris Trophy more often than not. And Drew just isn't that caliber of player anymore. He is still valuable. He is still productive. He is still someone you love on your team. It's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, is he worth $11 million per season? The answer is no. And it's been an overpayment maybe since he signed the contract, to be honest with you. Drew, it feels like he should probably be somewhere in the Kopitar range, somewhere around $7 million per season for a veteran guy who does a lot for your team on and off the ice, one of the faces of your franchise. And I think when you're talking about players like Anze Kopitar and like Drew Doughty, maybe you reward them a little bit more for what they've done for your organization on the whole, but not $11 million on the whole. So I love Drew Doughty. He's one of my favorite all-time Kings, but the truth is the truth. His contract at $11 million per year is an overpayment, and I got to give the contract of Drew Doughty our first thumbs down on this list. Mikey Anderson is entering year 2 of an 8-year contract that pays him $4.13 million per season. He's only 25 years old. He's already played 4 pretty much full NHL seasons, so a young guy with a ton of experience. The years are a bit much, but he's looked at as the Kings' best shutdown defenseman for years to come, and it's not like he has the type of skills that will likely erode over time. It's not like they're asking him to put up a certain number of points, and as you get older, maybe that declines, maybe it doesn't, but I would say it's hard to say he's overpaid as a top pairing defenseman. Certainly doesn't give you much offensively. That gets you more money when you're a Cale Makar or a Quinn Hughes or one of those types of guys. He doesn't have that, so obviously you shouldn't expect any money like that. But I still think as the years go on, Mikey Anderson will be a pretty good bargain, especially towards the back end of those years in his contract. I'm giving Mikey Anderson's contract a thumbs up. Vladislav Gavrikov is entering year 2 of a 2-year deal that pays him $5.87 million per season. That's probably a bit of an overpayment for a 28-year-old defenseman. Gavrikov, I think, is the most likely player I could see the Kings moving at the trade deadline next season if things aren't going as we hope. He's still good enough to be in demand for a team, a contending team, a playoff team, but he's likely not in the Kings' future plans beyond this season. I don't hate his contract. It's probably one of those ones, if I was being honest, I'd be kind of waffling on. It's okay. It's not horrible, but it's not great. But in the end, I will still give him a thumbs up, but it's not a strong thumbs up. Joel Edmondson, he will enter year 1 of a 4-year deal that will pay him $3.85 million per season. We did almost an entire episode of this show on how bad this contract is for a third pairing defenseman. Too many years, too much money. I will paraphrase a skit from the great Chappelle Show from years ago when Dave Chappelle's character said, quote, "I wish I had more hands so I could give this contract 4 thumbs down," end quote. He wasn't talking about contracts. He was talking about something else, but it still applies. This contract is awful. This is the worst contract the Kings have on their books right now, in my opinion. We have not forgotten the goalies, and we do have another thumbs down to give out. We will do that next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Hey, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. I have used Gametime to buy tickets to NFL, college football, and NHL games, and I am a very satisfied customer. The app is super easy to use and navigate. Just go on, tap on the listings, sports, music, shows, and they'll list the tickets with the best deals. And it's easy to search for tickets or teams or events with Gametime. And you get the lowest price guaranteed, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We wrap up our look at the current contracts for the LA Kings as we close it out with a look at the team's goaltenders. And we start with Darcy Kemper. He is entering year 3 of a 5-year contract that pays him $5.25 million per season. He's currently the 13th highest paid goalie in terms of average annual value, but he is not the 13th best goalie in the league based on his numbers over the past 2 seasons. Now, there are a lot of bad goalie contracts out there, and Kemper's isn't the worst, but it's not good. He lost his starting job last year in Washington, and I do expect him to at least have a bit of a bounce back in terms of his numbers. He'll be playing with a team that's better defensively, but he's still not clearly a number one goalie at this point, even though he does have a Stanley Cup on his resume, which is impressive. But we're looking at a 1A, 1B situation with David Riddick. He will most likely share time in net. Even if he doesn't, I can't imagine he's going to get more than 60% of the starts over the season. This is obviously assuming that everybody stays healthy. You do not want to be paying a 1A goalie over $5 million per season. Igor Shesterkin of the New York Rangers, who's a top 3 goalie and much younger, makes less than Darcy Kemper per season. Thatcher Demko in Vancouver, maybe the best goalie in the Pacific Division, makes less than Darcy Kemper. Jake Ottinger in Dallas makes less than Darcy Kemper. Now, eventually those guys' contracts will come up and they'll get paid, but we're talking about right now and how these contracts look. And there's no way to say that Darcy Kemper's contract gets a thumbs up, and he's under contract for 3 more years at over $5 million per year. We'll see how it goes in this first season. This contract doesn't have a great chance of aging very well, in my opinion, but we'll see. We'll keep our fingers crossed. But as far as our thumbs, this one gets a big thumbs down. Now, the 1B goaltender for the Kings next season will be David Riddick. He is coming in at a super reasonable $1 million per season. He's proven to be a reliable backup, and if things really go south with Darcy Kemper, I would feel okay about David Riddick if he was the have-to goalie that we absolutely had to go to. He can get the job done. It would be interesting to see if the Kings would go out and, I would assume, get somebody else to help him out, or not. Maybe they promote Phoenix Copley, but David Riddick, $1 million for a guy who you really feel good at as your second backup or your second goalie, the 1B to Darcy Kemper's 1A, with the possibility of maybe being a 1A. David Riddick's deal gets a thumbs up. And we have seen over the past few seasons that you have issues with goaltenders, whether somebody's not performing and he gets sent down, or if somebody gets hurt. It's always a great idea to have a veteran backup in the organization. And the Kings have that with Phoenix Copley coming off knee surgery. And, I would say, look, players in professional sports, all sports, knee surgery is a pretty common thing. Years ago, it wasn't. It was a lot more invasive procedure. Now you've got scopes and things that can go in and clean these things up and get them right and pretty much back to normal. Like I said, a little bit more concerning for me if it's a goalie rather than a skater, a goalie having to drop down and get back up and things like that. It seems like it would be a little bit more strenuous on the knee. That's my very non-expert opinion on that. But that said, again, I think the Kings obviously feel very confident Phoenix Copley is going to make a full recovery and will be available to go next season as the backup in the AHL to Eric Portillo and the emergency call-up if necessary with the LA Kings. We saw what he did a couple years ago in that role where he did a great job. And again, the contract, 1 year, $825,000, more than fair for a veteran goalie who has shown an ability to be able to fill in when necessary. Phoenix Copley's contract gets a thumbs up. So in conclusion, not including Jordan Spence or Arthur Kaliyev, we looked at 22 players, and I don't know, maybe you think like, gosh, I wish I had Eddie Garcia as my teacher in school. He gives all these passing grades out. But I think clearly there are only 3 contracts that you would definitely make a face at and say, oh, that's not right. Drew Doughty, Joel Edmondson, and Darcy Kemper. And I think Kemper and Edmondson are pretty obvious. The Doughty one, it's hard to say because how much I love Drew, and again, how much he is a legitimate, important part of this Kings team. He's on their top pairing. He runs the number 1 power play unit. He's been a wonderful player for the Kings organization. He's the greatest defenseman in Kings history, and he's still playing at a high level. Again, we're not condemning what he is as a player or what kind of career he has had. We're simply talking about what he's making now, what he's going to make in the next few years, and whether that's a good contract or a bad contract for the Kings as a team. And $11 million a year for Drew Doughty, it's just, I don't know how you can say that's a thumbs up. So you might be looking at this, and if you agree with me, which you may not, you might say, well, Rob Blake's done a pretty good job with all these contracts. Now, some of them are real bargains, like Trevor Moore and Adrian Kempe. But a lot of them, even if you feel like some of them maybe are a bit of an overpayment, like the Vladislav Gavrikov deal, it's not that bad. There's no glaring, horrific contracts on the books right now for the LA Kings. But of course, then you have to remember there used to be Cal Peterson. That was a horrible contract. Pierre-Luc Dubois, giving that guy 8 years was a horrible idea. And the Kings and Rob Blake have had to make moves to get himself out of those bad contracts. And those moves, in addition to giving those bad contracts, were not good for the team. So you do have to obviously keep that in mind when you're looking at the contracts that Rob Blake has handed out in his tenure as GM. And when you look at the current makeup of the Kings roster, there's certainly some good, but there were a few bad as well. So I hope you enjoyed that look, in my opinion, of the Kings' current contracts. Thumbs up or thumbs down. For you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch Locked On LA Kings every day, coming up on Wednesday, still working on a couple of special guests. We're waiting to hear back from one of them and see how that goes. So I can't spoil that at the moment or give you any details on that, but looking for a special guest as usual on our Wednesday show. Thursday, unless I think of something else, we're going to do a bit of a history lesson and look back at the Kings' top 10 biggest wins in franchise history. And of course, on Friday, we'll have another Kings fan feedback show. We've talked about this week the Arthur Kaliev situation. Any thoughts on today's show? Thumbs up, thumbs down on any of the Kings contracts. It's your chance to sound off on the Kings fan feedback show. If you want to get an email in for that, it's lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. And as always, you can leave your comments when you're watching YouTube in the comments section. And if you want to stay interactive with the show on social media, we are on X, Twitter, and Instagram. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you, as always, for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for listening and watching. We'll talk to you tomorrow. And as always, go Kings, go.